Hey everyone, welcome to our first deep dive of Open Web Foundry 6. We're going to have Arweave founder Sam Williams be talking today. And guys, remember that we have events every day this week. So tomorrow we're going to have a workshop for our local and spinning up a profit sharing community. And then on Friday, we're going to have our second community spotlight, where we're going to have founders from this Open Web Foundry cohort who are going to be presenting what they've been working on, asking for collaboration, feedback, and all sorts of things. And remember that we're going to have a mingle session afterwards as well. So if you guys have any questions for Sam, myself, or Seb, or anyone else in the ecosystem, feel free to stay afterwards, after the presentation that Sam gives, and we'll all come back into the audience and have a conversation. But without further ado, Sam, you're spotlighted and you can share your screen now.
All right, perfect. Thank you everyone for coming. I'm excited to talk to you about this. So I'll just share my screen here. Okay, I assume you can see it. Tell me if not. So yes, today I'd like to talk to you all about why and how you should build on the PermaWeb. So quickly, what is the PermaWeb? Well, the PermaWeb is an endowment-backed decentralized web where all of its content lives forever. It lives inside the Arweave protocol, which is a blockchain-like infrastructure which rewards people all across the world for replicating data, essentially in perpetuity thanks to its endowment structure. You can think of the relationship between the PermaWeb and Arweave as the same relationship between HTTP, the protocol that is underneath what we call the web. So the idea of this protocol is to essentially create the Library of Alexandria 2.0, spread all across the world so it's impervious to fire, flood, and people trying to destroy its information. There we go. So why would you want to build applications on such a system? This is actually a very interesting question, to which there are numerous answers. But I think that the most prominent one that is, I would say, not so well understood at this stage is that you can create web applications with this system that have no single controller. So back in the early days of the internet, everything was created as a protocol. That is a language, if you will, that computers can use to speak to each other. There was no sort of centralized coordination of these systems. And these are, examples would be SMTP, so the email protocol, or HTTP, the web protocol, or IRC, the early chat protocol of the internet. But over time, we ended up creating companies which were able to accrue the value of people's development work and also offer services in a much more centralized way. And so the incentive here appears to have been to create systems where people can capture the value of their work. I mean, Tim Berners-Lee, unfortunately, didn't capture very much of the value, which is trillions and trillions of dollars that was created by the web. In fact, he captured almost zero of that value, which is, I think almost all of us would agree, quite unfair. The same with IRC, SMTP, and so on. So there was this movement towards companies to offer services on the internet and to capture the value that is created by them. But sort of as a byproduct, what ended up happening is that those companies ended up capturing control as well as value. And we see the effects of that today in the conversations around what we like to call big tech at this point. This idea that actually control over cyberspace has fallen into the hands of essentially 3, maybe 4 large companies. And there's nothing that we as users of the web can do to stop that. It's just the way it is. Well, the PermaWeb reverts that trend. It says, okay, you can now create web applications that exist like protocols in that there is no centralized controller, but you, the developer, can capture the value that you have created. So we see the problems that centralized control over web services have created essentially everywhere. For example, YouTube demonetizing LGBTQ content. This is pretty awful for those people that have trusted the platform to essentially be their livelihood. But they can come along one day and just say, actually, this content isn't for us. We don't want to give you money for creating it. And there's no recourse. There's nothing you can do because it's a centralized company that controls it. And they, frankly, they owe you nothing, if you will. Like they are able to choose whom they give their service to completely freely within the law. Well, under a system like Arweave, in fact, really just Arweave at this point, you can create web applications, for example, a decentralized YouTube equivalent, where the content creators can be confident that they won't be deplatformed. And this happens to people of all sorts of opinions and all kinds of communities. So it also recently happened to Joe Rogan, the most popular podcaster in the world. Well, he trusted Spotify to host his content, and then 113 out of about 1,400 approximately episodes, so about 10% were just deleted. And there's nothing Joe Rogan can do about this, because he has trusted that company that sits in between him and his audience, and they've simply decided that this is the case. Well, the PermaWeb allows you to build applications that run in a disintermediated way with no one in the middle, just users speaking to users, abiding by a set of predetermined controls. So another way that you can approach this is say, well, actually in my application space, it doesn't make sense that there should be no controller, but what if the controller was the users directly? So you can find a way to give ownership to your users and then let them vote on how content should be moderated, for example, or what content should be highlighted on the homepage, or any number of different governance questions. This is a fundamentally different way of looking at web applications that gives power, one way or another, back to the users. And you as a developer can pick up and build on this today, and it feels exactly like building a normal web application. This is the power of the system that we described. So another angle to this is that users can trust the applications that you build on top of this system. What do we mean by that? Well, it's easiest seen in as converse to the current model of Web 2. So the current model of Web 2 looks something like this. At the beginning, you build an application. You put it out into the world, and it's free. Okay, cool. People start to use it. That's really exciting. You go and you take venture capital funding, typically, because your only alternative is to monetize extremely early, and that lowers usage of your application. There's like very clear studies that say if you monetize right at the beginning, your growth curve drops off. So that's not great. So the typical route is you take your thing that is kind of working, you go to venture capitalists, they bankroll it for a while. So now it's free for your users, and you're putting money into research and development, and the quality is increasing. Then you go through a phase of what we would call market capture. So you make sure that one way or another, your users can't really leave your service. Good example of this is how IRC was replaced by Slack. So IRC was essentially some people have never used it at this point, but it was a system that was an open protocol, it's free for everyone to use, and you could run a server which had a chat room in it, or a set of chat rooms, just in the same way that Slack works today. Well, when Slack first came along, Slack integrated well with IRC. And actually, it was just a nicer looking modern chat client. So great, people started to use it. And then after a while, they cut off the bridge to the open solution and performed market capture. So now everybody uses Slack, IRC is forgotten, and the value and power is accruing with that company. And once you get to this point, well, now those venture capitalists that you took onto your cap table understandably want to make a profit. So you have to go to profit maximization. Now you have captured your audience, you extract as much value as you possibly can from them without them leaving. And this is unfortunately the pattern with essentially all Web 2 companies. This is how the system works. But with PermaWeb apps, you can do something quite different, or rather, even by their very nature, the relationship between users and developers is different. So what happens in a PermaWeb app is once you launch it, it's permanent, so you can't take it back. You can, of course, launch a new version, but that has to increase in quality. Otherwise, users will simply use the prior version. And so now you can't force people to, for example, adopt a version which adds intrusive adverts or, spies on your data. I mean, an example I often give is Weavemail. So Weavemail is a decentralized email-like system on top of Arweave. The creator of the client for Weave Mail, put it out there and it doesn't spy on your data. Cool. So now if they try and change it in the future to make it spy on your data, well, they can release a new version, but you don't have to use it. And so now the relationship between user and developer is a transparent view of what the business model should be. And typically in PermaWeb applications, we use a different business model, which we'll get to later, that doesn't require you to profit or extract huge amounts of value from your users. But one way or another, the user knows upfront the deal that they are getting into. And a way to think about it is to say something like, what you see is what you get forever. It's just not going to change or get worse. It can only get better. So another reason that we should be excited about building PermaWeb applications is that they create and use open data sets. So there might be many different, well, there are many different applications on top of the PermaWeb, but they all write to what is essentially the same database, and they can read from it. And that means that they can share data between applications extremely fluidly. It's as if every application has an API by default. And from the user's point of view, this means that you're, again, not tied into an individual client if a better one is available. You have the power to choose and the power to move your identity. Well, essentially, you actually own and control your identity, and you can move between applications as you see fit. Relative to, for example, if you are a Google Suite user, Google owns your identity. And it's very, very difficult to move all of your data out of Google in a clean way and into a new application. But applications on Arweave are the opposite. The Mira, for example, is a fairly popular blogging platform. They upload all of their data to Arweave. If Agora, which is a sort of Twitter-like platform on top of Arweave, wanted to read that data, they just could. It's just a case of designing the right query. So it's really, really powerful way of combining data between many different applications. It allows you to start as a new developer, not from zero, from a data set that is empty, but from all of the data that already exists and you would like to interact with. It's kind of like the whole web was a massive open data lake. Okay, so another cool feature of the PermaWeb is, from a developer's perspective, is that you can create applications that have zero maintenance. So when you publish your application, you pay once, or actually at this point, we are subsidizing, so you don't even need to pay at all. But eventually you have to pay once to upload. And after you've uploaded, there is a relationship between users and gateways to the PermaWeb. So it's like you store your source code on the PermaWeb, and then the gateway, if you will, turns that into a rich application. It's like you're storing the text on one side, and that's the bit you pay for as the developer. And then the user and the gateway have a financial relationship of some form, where the gateway serves that data, animates the application, makes it look like a web app, like the user is used to, and serves it to them. And this economic relationship between the gateway and the user is completely at the discretion of the gateway operator and the user. Maybe the user wants to use a gateway that is ad supported and so is free. Okay, great, they can do that. Or they can use a gateway which they pay a tiny subscription fee for, or they pay as you go, or something like this. All of these options are possible. In fact, it's any monetization strategy you can imagine on the web, in the Web 2 world, can be ported across to this relationship. But from the developer's perspective, this is pretty cool, because you can essentially say, okay, I built this hackathon project over the weekend. It's kind of fun. I want to deploy it. Okay, cool. I've paid 1 cent per megabyte approximately, or free if it's below a certain point. And now it's available for people to use forever. I'm still using the same Weave Mail client that someone deployed 3 years ago at this point. They've never paid a single cent to maintain it. I just have that economic relationship as the user with the gateway, and that's how it keeps running. This is really, really, really powerful. So those are the reasons, or just actually some of the reasons you should consider building on top of the PermaWeb. But how do you do it? Well, it's pretty easy. If you can build simple JavaScript applications, like really basic stuff, then you can build on the PermaWeb. Really, building on the PermaWeb is just building web applications, but with a couple of different caveats. So build as normal, but instead of user accounts, use this library we call Arweave.js to interact with the user's wallet. You just import this, Arweave.js library through npm install Arweave.js, as you'd imagine. And then what's kind of interesting is now you can forget about user accounts completely. You just say, okay, I want to write data to the database, and which in this case is Arweave as well. You're kind of writing to that open data lake inside the PermaWeb, which is also the same place that your user interface is stored. So you want to write to it. You say, okay, great. I make a transaction, which is essentially the object that stores data. I sign it. And then at this point, the user's browser will pop up this little window, which we call wallet, and yes, say, would you like to sign this piece of data? And the user says yes or no. And there you go. And now you don't have to think about identity at all. The only caveat to that is if the user doesn't yet have an Arweave wallet, you want to detect that and say, hey, go to rconnect.io and download one. It's not so complicated. But it means that you just have completely forget the idea of user identity and management, which is actually pretty cool. So instead of using a backend database, people have this common pattern of, okay, so my front end goes on some sort of static web hosting service, whether that's from a server on AWS or from Vercel or something like that. And then in the background, I've got some database server, and the backend sort of speaks to it on the user's behalf. Well, in the Arweave world, you don't need to do that either. You just use this system called GraphQL, which you can query right from the front end. And this is a really powerful way of ensuring that, ensuring that you can access users' data without having to run a backend server of any kind, so you don't accrue those costs. And it just looks something like this. So here's a query using GraphQL, which looks for all of the transactions in the network that have a content type saying text HTML, and a user agent of Arweave Auto DPL, which is the decentralized public library. So give me everything that's been uploaded by the decentralized public library to the network, and that will return a bunch of IDs. And you can query pretty much arbitrarily on these things. And just using this system, you can build essentially all the different kinds of web applications you might want. Like Agora, as I was describing, this decentralized Twitter system, just uses this. And you're offloading the complexity of running that backend infrastructure to those gateway operators, who, unless you're interested in becoming one, you don't need to really know anything about it at all. It just kind of works. Okay, so instead of deploying with Vercel or, I know how you want to do it, but uploading to that AWS server, you just deploy with a thing called Arweave. It's pretty simple. You just install it, and then you deploy a directory. So you've built your web application. You just say Arweave deploy, the directory that contains it, and then there's just a little funny bit about using a bundler and giving a wallet. And to make a wallet, there's another command you run. But you only have to do that once. It's very, very simple. And then it's going to spit out for you an Arweave.net stroke something ID or URL, and you can go and paste that into a web browser, and it will load up your web application. Or you can go to, not just Arweave.net, but I don't know, there's I think gateway.rio, gateway.r.io. For example, there's another gateway. Stroke that transaction ID, you can put it in any gateway, and you'll get the same thing back, which is, how we get decentralization of the system. Another way to do that, if that looks a little bit complicated, just use this thing called Argo, which is very much like Vercel. So you can just add this deployment, infrastructure to your build pipeline, and then you just press a button and it goes, and it's on the PermaWeb. And you can even attach that easily to a domain name, so that users go to yourapp.com rather than some transaction ID. So this is how you build a PermaWeb app. One extra thing you might want to be aware of is how can you govern that application? As we were describing in the beginning, you can have it be simply what they would in the Ethereum community call code is law. So you set the rules at the beginning, all of your users decide whether or not they abide by or agree with those rules, and subsequently use or don't use your application. and then just let it run. Or you can have it run by the users of the application itself. And so for this, there's a library called, well, a service called community.xyz. And it looks a little bit like this. So you can start what we call a profit-sharing community on top of Arweave, which is a simple business model that can be deployed in almost any web application. The idea is, okay, so when there is a point at which the user would make a payment or do some kind of financial interaction, you can take a tip from this, a small extra fee, and you can send it to the owners of this, what we call a token, but you can think of it as equivalent to an ownership share in the application. Yes, and you would distribute it to them sort of live. This is like an application that generates revenue for the people that have created and funded it as people use it directly, kind of instant rewards, if you will. And the more people that use the application, of course, the more rewards there are. And so this is a powerful way of accruing that value that your application has created, even though you're not accruing the control of that application, as we described at the beginning. So there's this simple interface that you can use to interact with it here on community.xyz, and you can perform different kinds of votes. And interestingly, you'll see here on the vote number 1, because these votes are 0 indexed for some reason, it says that it wants to set a value inside this profit-sharing community, the fee, to 5. And essentially what we're saying here is, well, this can be read out inside the application itself, and then, let the users govern it as they go, broadly speaking. But it's not just the fees that you can set. It's actually any value you want. So you could say, hey, let's highlight, these different pieces of content on the homepage today, or let's blacklist, this wallet address or something like that. And you can have your users vote on it, and then you can import this library and just reflect in your UI those changes. So there's a lot more to say about profit-sharing communities, and we'll have a different session about that soon. But this is a broad principle of how do you govern the application. Okay, thank you so much for joining us. I hope that was helpful. Very excited to chat to you in the Mingle session. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys. You can join us in the Mingle session now. Remember, we have events tomorrow at the same time, also on Friday, and then we have workshops from Kive tomorrow at 11 a.m. Eastern time, and then from Spheron on Friday at 11 a.m. Eastern. See you guys down there.